All right, today's guest, Mahmoud Khalil, is not somebody that we thought we'd be able to welcome onto DropSite's stream, or we worried that we might not be able to. He was jailed by the U.S. government back in the early days of the Trump administration, specifically for his role in serving as a lead negotiator for students at Columbia who were protesting Gaza's genocide. He is now a somewhat free man, although the government continues to try to persecute him and deport him. He'll be joining us just in one moment. Meghnad Bose is my DropSite colleague who has been covering campus protests around the country, and in particular, also the Columbia protest was the first, I believe, to report on Mahmoud's detention and his arrest. So, Meghnad, thank you so much for joining us on this stream.
Thank you for having me, Ryan.
And let's welcome Mahmoud Khalil as well, who's joining us. Mahmoud, really grateful to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me, Ryan and Meghnad. Really a pleasure to share this space with you.
And if anybody has questions, they could try to tag us on Twitter, and I'll try to scan through some of those. But we have a decent amount of time with Mahmoud today, so we wanted to get his, a lot of his kind of life story, his background, that what led him, to this kind of central place, not just in American affairs, but even in world affairs. But first, I want to start with you. You've been on, you've done a few media rounds, and a few of them have gone quite viral. You continue to get pressed, even as we're staring at the mass starvation, the mass extermination of a captive population of 2 million people. That's what's happening as the three of us are speaking right now. One of the most horrific events of our lifetime. We're talking Rwanda level, and may exceed Rwanda if it doesn't turn around immediately. This is what's happening this very moment. When you do interviews, you continue to get asked about October 7th, 2023. It's now July 2025. I'm curious, as you get these questions, like where does your mind go? Can you walk us through a little bit of your kind of internal monologue as you're sitting there with patience, thinking about how to respond in those situations?
Yeah. I mean, most of the time, I just feel like it's outrageous that I get to ask this question as if, everything started on October 7, or that I need to answer this question that oh, now I am a human, that now you deserve, I deserve to speak out, or that I'm now, it's sort of like that question. And that's why we refuse to, most Palestinians refuse to answer such question. It's just because they use it to credit you or discredit you, whether you're allowed to speak or not allowed to speak. At a time, as you said, where my people, when, for example, when that interview happened last week, and the news from the morning was over 100 Palestinians were starved to death. And then the first question I get asked is, do you condemn Hamas, or what do you think about October 7? As if if Hamas disappears tomorrow, that Palestinians will get their rights and the killing would stop. And we know that this wouldn't be the case at all, because Israel's goal is to disappear, to ethnically cleanse all Palestinians, regardless whether Hamas is there or not, regardless of who's in power, because their main issue is with us Palestinians, with us being on the ground, calling for our human rights, calling for our self-determination, and that's why I get very outraged by such questions. That's why I struggle to keep my composure while answering such outrageous questions. And I mean, but it seems they don't get it. That's the main problem. They don't get why we refuse to answer such questions.
And it seems like, in Meghnad, then you can jump in after this. and it seems like the answer, of course, I condemn the killing of civilians, isn't satisfactory. And I do actually understand the idea behind some of the questioning in the sense that you want to get a kind of shared moral kind of plateau where all of you can speak to each other. And I interviewed Ted Cruz back in, I think it was December of 2023. And I told him, you've asked a lot of people to condemn Hamas. You said that that's the precondition for having any conversation. Like, hey, let me read to you the 25 different things that leading Israeli figures have said should be done to Palestinians. Well, you condemn that, and then once you condemn that, then we can have a conversation. But he wouldn't do that. He said I condemn nothing. And in that situation, I wasn't asking him to condemn the IDF broadly. I wasn't asking him to condemn the Israeli government. Just specific comments from specific officials, one of whom called for the nuking of Gaza and had been condemned himself by people inside the Israeli government. And he wouldn't even go to that level. So as you think about who is allowed to speak in this conversation, who's allowed to be humanized, who's dehumanized, that feels like a part of it, like that massive tilt. So given that that's the kind of playing field that you've been participating in, how did that affect your interactions with the media when you were serving as a media representative for the protesters, and how did it affect your strategy when you would go in and negotiate with the administration of Colombia, knowing kind of the what you're up against?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, it's always such matters are taken from an Israeli perspective, only from an Israeli lens, as if like what our experience is doesn't matter, that we have to cater for that other perspective, and yeah, we need to police our language so it fits that that condition, like the conditionality of speech that they're requiring from us. As you said, at a time where like my people actually are being are getting killed, and I usually, to be honest, like I don't compromise. My main objective, I mean, in general, is to get the Palestinian rights, to get the Palestinian self-determination, but also at Colombia is to get these three demands, like to Colombia to divest its investments from companies complicit in human rights violations, to cut ties with Israel, to disclose its investments, and I keep focusing on just like usually my approach is just rights-based approach, and just to keep centralizing Palestine. Even when they asked me, for example, about like, do you condemn Hamas? I want to bring it back to the mass killing, the genocide that's happening in Palestine, because that's the thing that they don't want to hear. So I want to keep it in their face. I want them to reflect on how silly their question is, or their framing, actually how silly that is. And in terms of like in negotiation at Colombia, like I always try to bring like data, to bring like, I told them like I'm Palestinian. I pay tuition fees to Columbia University, but I cannot go and participate in Columbia Global Center in Tel Aviv, although like, I'm a paying student, I should be able to. Why not? I take them back to Colombia's affirmative or value statement, and just like show the hypocrisy in that. And that's what they hate. They hate when you flag to them the double standards, because they know it deep inside. They know it. They just don't want to confront their hypocrisy when it comes to whether like dealing with Palestine and dealing with the Palestine exception. And this is where I bring it up, like to be in their face, that there is a Palestine exception. You're not doing that just because it's Palestine. You're asking me these questions just because I'm Palestinian. If it were like about anything else, you wouldn't do this.
Mahmoud, you spoke about, we do want to get into to more about your life before Columbia. But before that, you spoke about the negotiations with Columbia University administration last April. It's been 15 months since then, and a lot at the university and indeed in the United States has changed. Colombia recently entered into a deal with the Trump administration that gave massive concessions to the federal government, including a $200 million fine, but basically made pro Palestine advocacy in the campus harder than ever. And those demands that you were negotiating for seem almost impossible in today's Colombia climate. So, just wondering how you reacted to that news and what thoughts you have to share with us on that.
Yeah. I mean, Colombia never wanted to negotiate or to actually answer the student demands. They wanted to buy time. They wanted to make sort of a veneer of dialogue that we are engaging with the students. But that was like well understood that they had to negotiate with the students because they escalated their actions. There was no option like to them. They brought violence into campus. They brought the police. They tried to do that, and then they saw that it's not successful. So the fact that Colombia now struck this deal and adopted IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, it's to me it's just like bringing that to the surface because Colombia was already working under the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism was actually not respecting its own law, its own rules and procedures when it comes to protests, and I don't think like I always say that like not through negotiation you would get what you want because negotiation you negotiate over something like you have to get leverage and the leverage is the student body strength, the student body opposition to Colombia's complicity in or material support to the genocide in Palestine. So absolutely like Colombia never learns from its history, whether in the 30s when they expelled a student for opposing Nazi Germany, or in the 60s in the civil rights movement, and go on. However, you know, the students are the ones who kept going, who kept insisting on pushing for the university to respect the human rights, to actually listen to what matters, because usually what matters is your students and your community, your alumni, faculty. But Colombia always chooses cowardness over its values, or I mean, it's not the values that they preach, and it's clear. I mean, you know, in this deal, Colombia not only failed to protect me and protect other students, but also Colombia emboldened a very racist and or a very dangerous anti-Palestinian rhetoric on campus. They also threw the principles of academic freedom under the bus, because they only want to protect their now tarnished brand that I think like everyone can agree that the Colombia brand is no longer there, but also their money and their endowment, and if they think, I mean, they're just buying time as in every power around the world now, buying time for when it comes to Palestine, thinking that by curbing the Palestine speech and freedom of speech, that the students would be intimidated, that people around the world would be intimidated and they would forget. But if anything, like history can teach us is that, you know, people will prevail eventually, and it's happening as we speak right now. That like the change is happening for when it comes to the rights of the Palestinians.
And can you talk a little bit about how what the negotiations were like, what your role was, and how you specifically kind of became this, you know, this lead negotiator for the students? I assume the students wanted a Palestinian to be their representative, first of all. But that alone is not, there were a lot of Palestinians who were protesting, so that alone wouldn't make you the one. So what was it kind of about your kind of nature or approach to protest, you think, that made you acceptable to all the different factions, and what was the role?
Yeah. So I was basically like nominated to have this role by the students and faculty, as you know, as someone, as you said, like one important factor was that I'm Palestinian. I speak for you know, like my people's pain and needs. The second thing is I also was like part of two big Palestinian groups on campus, but also I had this relationship with the administration, like since before October 7, like since because when people think that Colombia started suppressing Palestinians, they think it's only happened after October 7, but no, Colombia historically suppressed Palestinian voices on its campus. So even in April 2023, when I first joined Colombia, and we tried to host a human rights watch to come and offer a lecture about international law in Palestine, Colombia gave us a very difficult time to host that lecture. So I had this kind of like relationship with the administration, and I have like my background in working. You know, I worked for 10 years before coming to Colombia with in a non-profit and in the British Embassy. So I have like this diplomatic experience as well. And based on that, the students and others thought that I would serve in this capacity. And in terms of the role itself, and that's very good question. I mean, a lot of people don't understand how student like movement function, thinking that it is like very you know, that it's a one um, or very homogeneous. I would say like that it's only one thing. But like in a student movement, when it's very leaderless, very non-hierarchical, and just, you know, like you have to communicate with different students, not only one student. So what I was doing is basically, you know, we have these principles, demands. I would go to the negotiation room and negotiate these demands, and whatever I can get out of the university, I would go up back to the encampment in sort of an assembly. So everyone in the encampment would have a say, would vote. So there wasn't like a leader that would say yes or no. There wasn't like a committee, a small committee that would say yes or no. It was like very um, uh, just like very horizontal.
Occupy Wall Street democracy.
That everyone would have a say, and as part, like after the assembly, people would then like vote on a response. I would go back to the administration and answer and give them the answer of the students, and try to extract some concessions and back and forth. But it was very clear, like to me, and the students understood that, and it was very honest about it, that the university is not or was not engaging in good faith conversation. I was threatened, like, you know, with the National Guard. Like they gave me a piece of paper and told me, like, if you don't sign this by 12 a.m. today, the police or National Guard would come. So I had to use my judgment in terms of, like, I called their bluff. I was like, okay, we're leaving. We're not gonna negotiate under these circumstances, because the administration still feels that like the students are beneath them, that the students don't know, that they are just kids, and they refuse to do that. Like when I went inside, I met them eye to eye. Like you're not like more senior or better than me, and we're just equal. And based on that, we established that relationship.
Yeah, and then Meghnad, if you got anything, but so how did you get to this place? So you're born in a refugee camp in Syria. How did your parents get to this camp, and what was the camp like? Because as you know, like a refugee camp can mean a lot of different things depending on where and who was in there.
Yeah. So my grandparents were exiled from Tiberias in Palestine, and they had to walk like to the nearest safe area, which where they eventually settled in our camp. It's a very small Palestinian refugee camp in southern Damascus. It's about, I believe, 40 miles away from the borders. So they did not like go like into Damascus, or they wanted to stay as close as possible. And they lived for a number of years in a tent until they eventually like upgraded to a mud house. And then they decided to build like a concrete house, because for Palestinians, for Palestinian refugees, the camps are just temporary. They are like a station that you wait until you go back to Palestine. So we only got like sanitation and internet like in the early or not the early, like 2007 2008, I believe, like in our camp, and that we got like these services, and it was mostly Palestinian refugees from northern Palestine, like from Tiberias, the most majority, or the Galilee area, and I mean I studied in UNRWA schools all my life, up until like ninth grade. Then I moved to like a government school, a public school, a Syrian public school, in a nearby area. But usually in Palestinian camps, they value education, because for them, the vast majority, they don't have any wealth. And any wealth they had, like they left it back in Palestine. So for all of us, like education was our salvation, was the way like to, like to get a proper job and then to build your life. That's why like my family really invested in our education, to like to the most possible degree, because we're like a lower middle class family. Both my parents were like they worked like in different like departments, and yeah, but then with the start of the Syrian uprising in 2011, things got really bad. I was involved in political and relief efforts in our camp and in that surrounding area, which made me like a target. So I eventually fled, fearing political prosecution in Syria, and fled to live in Lebanon.
Mahmoud, when you speak, and when we spoke to your friends as well, they described you as a double refugee, that a Palestinian who had to seek refuge in Syria and then had to flee Syria and then relocate to Lebanon, eventually leaving Lebanon to come to the United States. Can you talk about when you were detained by ICE and DHS, that feeling of political persecution in the United States? I mean, you've felt, or you've experienced political persecution, or the threat of political persecution, when you were in Syria. How did that compare? Did you think when you were moving to the United States that you'd face political persecution of this nature? Maybe something you would have faced in Syria here in the US?
Yeah, I mean, it was shocking to me to see this kind of censorship and targeting happening in the US, especially when all I did, like, was advocating for the rights of my people, for their dignity, for their their justice. So I mean, I never had high hopes of American democracy. Like I always thought that there is an exception to Palestine when it comes to American democracy, because living in Lebanon and Syria, I was I was a victim of the U.S. foreign policy when it comes to that specific area. But still, like my belief in the Constitution and in the laws, like at least domestically, like was solid. I believed that like I wouldn't be targeted for my political speech. So I absolutely, like, it was shocking to me, and and I kept asking myself, like, I literally fled like Assad's Syria to come and seek safety in the country of the free, in a country that like proclaims liberty and freedom of speech as like the foundation of this country. Yeah, they found a loophole in the system to come after me for my political speech. But it's again, like, it's about how violence against Palestinians is transnational. That doesn't stop at the borders in Palestine or in the refugee camps. That actually it transcends to unfortunately to the free world, quote unquote.
Hey, can you talk a little bit about, you mentioned earlier the work with the British Embassy through a nonprofit through the British Embassy. What was what was your day-to-day work like, and stretched for a decent amount of time, like you said?
Yeah, so I worked the first 5 years in Lebanon. I worked in an NGO, basically offering education opportunities to Syrian refugees. So I was like operations manager, responsible for like 3 schools, about 1,200 Syrian kids in our schools, and also offering scholarships at the higher education levels, like for Syrians to go study at Lebanese universities, Jordanian, British, and American universities as well. And then for the next like other 5 years, I joined the British Embassy also as program manager in the Syria office, so also offering education opportunities for Syrians. So I led a very prestigious British scholarship program called Achievening for Syrian and Palestinian students to go and study in the UK to study master's degree. So it was like aligned with my values of offering opportunities for people, like, and especially those who I care about. And also there was part of it that I would do also political analysis about Syria, and like working with the embassy, like especially on Syria, it was aligned with my political vision to Syria of seeing a regime change in Syria, because the regime in Syria like targeted my family, liberated like the Palestinian, like Yarmouk camp, which is the largest Palestinian camp outside of Palestine. So and that all, like, as I said, like sort of like agreed with my values and my vision toward offering opportunities for Syrians.
Was it?
Yeah, no,
last question on that. Was it what was it difficult for you to see yourself aligned with the British government? Because I given your politics, given your parents and your grandparents' history and the British role in that, and in Western policy towards Palestine, how did that feel? How did you kind of make your peace with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's two parts, to be honest, and I never agreed with their approach in Palestine whatsoever. And in fact, that was one of the questions in my interview, and my answer was very, very clear that I'm only working because like it's in the interest of the Syrian people, and it's in the interest of the values I believe in. The second part is like I wanted to learn. I wanted to see how such like the British bureaucracy is one of the oldest bureaucracies in the world. I think it's the first bureaucracy in the world, and they wanted to learn just like foreign service, public service, how that works from the inside, and I believe that I contributed and I learned a lot from that experience that I don't think I would have received such experience anywhere else.
Yeah, that experience, and then I'll let you jump in there, Maghnad, also kind of puts the absurdity, as I think it puts the absurdity of the questions that you get from like CNN and others. Do you condemn Hamas? When actually, like in that case, you're pretty much working in opposition to them. But you're not allowed to have any of that texture outside of just a pure Israeli prism. But go ahead, Meghnad.
No, what I was asking was that you spoke about your political vision and the kind of work you did. And obviously that informed your decision to apply to the policy school at Columbia, right? And you were doing a master's in public administration. You finished up your program December 2024. The genocide in Gaza was ongoing at that time for more than a year. And by the time you were arrested in March, you'd already got I believe days prior you'd got to your arrest, you'd got an offer letter from a prestigious NGO. Given your 104 days in prison, has that changed the kind of work you want to do, the kind of work you see yourself doing? And would you be taking up that job? Are you looking for different work opportunities now?
Yeah. No, I mean my experience only solidified my my belief in or just like my aspiration, my career aspiration. And as you said, like when I wanted to come here, I always wanted to work like in international affairs in the public service of Syrians and Palestinians. That's why even before October 7, like when I first came to New York, I interned at UNRWA in New York and at their office in New York and stayed for over 6 months there. And later I also interned at the Palestine mission to the UN. So I always had this, like I always believed in a role, in my role and just advocating for the rights of my people through different means, and there's no one right way to do that. So I believed, as my role at Colombia, I was doing it on the ground, and then at the UN doing it on that very formal position, and then after graduation I got this like Palestine policy advisor position. And that was like, on track with my career aspiration of playing an active role in the Palestinian policy making and in the Palestinian advocacy sphere. And now I think like I want to continue doing that. Absolutely in not that capacity anymore, like in joining an NGO. I'm still trying to figure that out, to be honest. I'm only 1 month and a week after my release, so I want to have the time to really think what's the best way to fight for my people, given also just like the changing like environment that's happening around me or just like in the Palestine sphere and in the country.
Can you talk about those contrasting emotions? Because I mean, you were reunited with your wife Noor and your baby Deen, who was born while you were in detention, and Deen is around 3 months old now. And there's obviously that joy you're experiencing as a father, and reunited with your wife too. But at the same time, you're seeing images of children being starved in Gaza, and there's that immense sadness. Can you talk about how you're processing those contrasting emotions right now?
Yeah. So Meghnad, upon my release, like I said a word that like, my release is sweet, but it's not a victory, and we shouldn't take it as a victory while just like hundreds of Palestinians are getting killed every day, and this is something like I really struggle with every single day, just to find the balance between just family and having a normal life, but also seeing your people killed. And just like a couple of days ago, like literally, like my wife and I were yeah, so sort of like crying about like we have food to feed Deen, but just thinking about the hundreds of thousands of Palestinian kids who or Palestinians who don't have food to feed their family. And I was like, and Noor asked me like, can you imagine like us not being able to get food to Deen? And that got me like to my core. Um, but we need to continue like fighting, and this is what keeps me going, always, like just the fact that the killing is not stopping. Like I can't take a break, but the genocide will not take a break. The killing will not take a break. um and and that's why like I'm really like struggling and on a personal level, like to find like how can I go. But at the same time, I feel this is what they want us to feel. They want us to feel helpless. They want us to feel that like we cannot fight this machine. And this is why like I want to continue actually, given all the risks, giving everything that's like being targeted for anything I say, being like under immense risk, whether of deportation or anything else. But I feel the cost of remaining silent, the cost of ignoring that is much higher than me speaking out for Palestinians.
When you were first arrested, it seemed to me that DHS had mistaken you for somebody who was here on a student visa. Was that your impression that you got from the people that picked you up? Because it felt like once they realized you were a permanent resident, they were then stuck and had to then reverse engineer some rationale for why actually it's okay what they did to a permanent resident rather than a visa holder. But I've never seen any proof if that's the case. What is your sense of whether or not, like, and there's no excuse for that. It's like, guys, all you have to do is type his name into you're the one that has the system. Like you just put his name in and boom, it pops up.
Yeah.
Not
And
complicated.
that shows you unfortunately the state of the government right now, where
Well, it would also suggest that your name was given to them by somebody who didn't have access to the database. And then they just ran
absolutely.
with it.
I mean, there's like so many scenarios or like that could have happened. But yeah, that shows you like there isn't any level of due diligence, that they wanted to act very quickly. They wanted just like to bring someone in.
Was that your impression?
Yeah,
that they
absolutely. I mean,
thought you were on a
because
student visa?
the first thing that they told me that night was like, when I told them like why you're here, they told me your student visa has been revoked. And I was like, I don't have a student visa, and I'm a green card holder. And you can see like visibly they got confused. Even like they had like to call like 10 times. And then they said like, oh, bring him anyways. despite like when he saw he took a picture of the green card and sent it to someone. They arrested me. That's why I felt like at the beginning, like it might be just like a clerical mistake. When I get there, it will be done. Like, that they will clarify it, and I will be out. But that shows you like the state of the government right now, that they are, as you said, like it's the bare minimum you do. Like you just like you don't depend on these shady groups online that they everything about what they say is wrong. It's not about like my status in the United States. It's just like who is Mahmoud Khalil as a person, what this movement is actually about, and so on and on. Like that goes, but that goes like that shows you just like how they are functioning, like that the lies and the incompetence really runs deep. Yet they get away with it. Like they get away with it. That's why like they did not show me an arrest warrant. They later claimed that I tried to flee the scene, and they just kept with their lies. And at every turn, we proved them wrong. Like when they said, oh, like he tried to run. We brought the camera like footage and the surveillance footage, and I was like so chill, like like I mean, and same with the arrest warrant. Like when we pressed them to produce the arrest warrant, they said we didn't have an arrest warrant, and these practices is just like very authoritarian. Very fascist, in fact, and they just like trying to see what can stick and what not. And now like the federal judge said that my detention or the review determination was likely unconstitutional. But who's paying for that?
Right.
Yeah, you spoke about the Rubio determination and what you went through in detention. But if we talk about the present day, the pressures on student protesters or those who express solidarity with Palestine is at an all-time high, even as the genocide is arguably at its most severe in this 1.5 year. And your arrest, I mean, DHS and a DHS official told the court, was based on records submitted by Canary Mission and Betar, two doxing pro-Israel organizations that colluded with the Trump administration to harass you and detain you and others. Do you feel that given the pressures right now on students, and Colombia just recently announced mass sanctions on close to 80 protesters for a library protest, what message would you have to those who are students right now at these universities, not just Colombia, but across the United States, who are weighing whether they should come out to protest, how they should come out to protest? And would you have done anything differently knowing that your arrest happened in March 2025? If you could go back in time by a year, would you have chosen to keep a lower profile in the negotiations, in the encampment, etc.?
Yeah, I mean that's so many questions, Meghnad, but I will attempt to answer them. But I must be frank, Meghnad. Like the fear is real, the exhaustion is real, and just the oppression and suppression is real too. However, I think that the students stood up against this just like overreach, this authoritarianism, and they will continue to do so. In movements, in social movements, it's not always like steady. Like you erupt, you take a step back, and then you erupt again. It's not like it's not linear. The change is not linear, and the move is not linear. And I would say, like, like for people to check their risk appetite, but no one is safe. And the fact that you would be silent doesn't mean that you are safe. They would come after you when the time comes. And this is what I say by the cost of remaining silent would be much more higher than actually speaking out. And would I have done things differently? I don't think so. Like I oppose the genocide against my people, as everyone should, as everyone now like around the world should actually be speaking out against this genocide, against the indiscriminate killing of civilians, of people, of entire people, against the apartheid, against the occupation. And I don't see a world where I would have done things differently. Of course, I would, like I could have, I don't know, like said something or like built more relationships, of course, but like the core main thing of opposing a genocide, of being vocal to support the rights of my people would be the same. I don't think I would have there's a scenario where I wouldn't speak out against the killing of my people.
It reminds me of the book. Have you read the book If We Burn by Vincent Bevins?
No.
Also the author of the Jakarta Method. In the book, he traces about 10 years of protest activity around the world. He looks at the protests in Brazil, Turkey, Hong Kong, the Arab Spring. It travels around the world, speaks to a lot of these protest leaders. And he wrote it before kind of Black Lives Matter 2020 in the United States, and then also the encampments here. But in almost every single case, actually, and I think in every single case, the eventual result of the protests was not just nothing, but the opposite of what the protesters had fought for. And he doesn't finish it with an argument. He just kind of lays out the history. But the implicit argument seems to be that something about horizontal mass protest in an era of mass media and consolidating authoritarianism is a mismatch, and that the authoritarianism and the right in particular is able to co-opt it and then weaponize it as a bludgeon to reverse and launch some counter revolution. Having participated in this mass mobilization in the United States against the genocide and seeing it only accelerate, do you have any thoughts on kind of horizontal mass mobilization?
No, you're totally. I mean, there's absolutely a point in that because we were opposing Colombia's ties with Israel, and now it only strengthened. But I don't think that's as I've said like a few minutes ago about movements not being like linear change.
Right.
Like there wouldn't be like 1, 2, 3. And that applies to a lot of movements, like when Algeria threw out like the French, it didn't happen in 1 year or 2 years or even 10. Like it took them 130 years to do that. Similarly with the civil rights movement in the United States, it didn't only take these like 3 years. It was like building up on so much. So that's one thing I think like it's very good. Thank you so much for pointing this out because a lot of people feel like defeated now that like the killing is happening, everything is happening, but unfortunately, like that's social movements. That's how they work, and institutions and governments are usually the last to respond to change on the ground. But the change is happening, and the movement also. I want to point out this very important point. Because people think the movement is only about protests, it's only about civil disobedience, but it's not. Like the movement is about building solidarity. It's about political education. It's about building a base. It's about mutual aid, and this is all is happening. It's just like it doesn't make it to the surface because like. Usually media focus on different matters, but this is happening, and I mean we can see now in the United States that, or at least in New York, with the the election of not I mean that like Zohran's winning the primary. This is change. The same around the world, like with France changing course in its foreign policy. But because the change comes from the people, like no one would bestow like this like to you and give you because they are nice. No, you have to actually go and claim it. And this is what we're seeing now. It's just like we need to be very persistent, and we shouldn't lose hope or accept half measures, because accepting half measures is what would set you back actually, rather than because I was so happy that we did not agree to anything from Colombia. Like they gave us like breadcrumbs, and I would say like hush money with scholarships here and money there. But this would have set the movement back more than like actually like rejecting that and continuing and doubling down. And I believe this is what's happening right now. Like Trump wouldn't stay in power forever. The public, especially the American public, are now awakening to the U.S. complicity in the genocide in Palestine, and to Israel's influence on politics here. And it's just a matter of time, to be honest. Like I don't want to sell like false hope, but this is, I believe, that what the reality is.
Mahmoud, you went last week to DC because you're talking about politics and politicians here. You were in DC last week. You met a bunch of congressional leaders. Can you talk about what those conversations were like? What were you asking? What were they asking you?
Yeah, I mean, mostly I went to DC like first to, as much as possible, like ask lawmakers to support the Stop the Bombs Act, and to just like get answers on why the U.S. is still fueling this genocide, and the others is just like to seek accountability in terms of the students who were expelled, regarding like Colombia's capitulation to the Trump administration, and also Trump's authoritarian practices against dissent in this country. But I think the main or the overarching theme was that Palestine is becoming this single issue that everyone cares about, whether in Congress or outside, and they're feeling that urge, that like their constituents are actually asking them about their position about Palestine. And I think I've mentioned it to Prem when I said, but like, in the past, Palestine was a liability to politicians. I think now it's the opposite. Israel is becoming the liability, and it's becoming that single issue that everyone wants to speak about, and that's why like it's very very urgent and very important that we continue the pressure on them, because they need to see it in their face rather than just go and hide from it.
Right. Well, Mahmoud, this was really helpful and enlightening. I really appreciate you taking a significant amount of time out of your day to chat with us today. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, man. Thanks, Meghnad.
Yeah, thank you, Meghnad. Very much appreciate it, and thank you to everybody who was watching or is going to watch this on clips that we put up later. On behalf of all of my colleagues, I'm Ryan Grimm with DropSite News, and we'll see you soon.